Good afternoon. I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for May 17th, 2022. Just for interest, May 17th is recognized as the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. And today at the fire hall, on the apron, they raised the flag. Council had been invited to that. Unfortunately, due to a long-running meeting with PetroCanada this morning, I made it to about the front doors of the ambulance bay when I heard the applause for the raising of the flag. But in any event, signifying that we do take seriously our proclamation that we are a welcoming and inclusive community, and the community came out to raise the flag and recognize this International Day, and it's important that we recognize that as well. Also, about to begin is the Battle of Alberta, and I'm going to assume that these are the Edmonton fans on this side, and
Hold on. Slide over there.
Flames over there. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to the agenda? I'm going to suggest, if there is a councillor interested in doing so, I would be disposed to accept an addition to the agenda to add perhaps as agenda item 3A. Delegations. We are pleasured to have a number of residents in attendance today. I don't think that, given the circumstances, any of them have been able to take steps to be added to the agenda, but there are people here and we can imagine why they are here. I would think that we might give them an opportunity as delegates to speak to council, and I would suggest that come early in the agenda after the formalities following approval of the minutes. So if there might be a councillor prepared to make that. Many councillors prepared to make that. I think I did see Councillor Wilson's hand up first. So that is a motion then from Councillor Wilson to add agenda item 3A, delegations, to the agenda. Are there any other changes to be made to the agenda? I'll call the motion for the addition first. All those in favor? There are none opposed, and might I then have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Keller-Valenti, thank you for that. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Councillors, you have a number of minutes that are before us for approval. I'll begin with the regular meeting minutes of May 3rd, 2022. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? If there are none, might I have a motion, please, to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of May 3rd, 2022 as presented? Councillor Waxer, thank you. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The Legislative Committee meeting minutes also of May 3rd are attached, although I'm not sure that Council would approve those minutes.
Your worship, I believe in terms of reference, they would be forwarded to the next regular council meeting for review or adoption. Maybe that's in the court's terms reference.
But, they are there, the minutes of the meeting. Councillor Hall and I attended that meeting. I am satisfied that those minutes are a fair reflection of what was discussed at that committee meeting. So if there is need for a motion, perhaps Councillor Hall, you would be best suited. Did you have questions about it though, or you were just going to make the motion? I have a motion and I will accept from Councillor Hall to approve the minutes of the Legislative committee meeting of May 3rd, 2022. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And finally, we have committee of the whole meeting minutes of May 10th. And as had been discussed, I think at our last meeting, the legislative committee suggested that it is more efficacious that we have these minutes confirmed by council at the first opportunity, in the event that there are decisions that arise today based on committee work a week ago. There's no sense having these minutes approved a week hence. So they are on for approval at today's meeting. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those committee meeting minutes of May 10th? If not, may I have a motion, please, to approve those minutes? Sir Melnick, thank you. Got yourself in there. I have a motion from Councillor Melnick that council approve the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of May 10th, 2022 as presented. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That takes us primarily through the formal items on the agenda, which will take us to the newly added agenda item 3A, delegations. And there are, as I indicated earlier, a number of community residents in attendance here today, and we thank you for that. I actually hope that it's becoming a standard that we will see moving forward. It's always happy to have our residents here so we can hear directly from them the issues that impact them. I anticipate that council can imagine why you are here, but you are, of course, entitled to speak for yourselves. So I would say that having recognized that there will be a or perhaps several delegations, I would invite anybody that wishes to address council just to come forward, confirm your name and the topic that you wish to address. And I won't change any rules at this juncture. Previously, those of you who have presented to us have been advised that we try and enforce a 3-minute presentation maximum. And so that will be the rule that we apply still today. And that will be subject, of course, to any questions that council might have. But if anybody wishes to speak to council from the gallery, come forward and proceed. Mr. Correspondence, welcome.
Bill, appreciate your time. Good. Hi, so Correspondence. Come back to say again that that I and several members of the business community are quite concerned that we have got no progress on omission or amendment to have coverings over the use of public spaces. Short and sweet. We just want to make it clear that this is deeply concerning to all of us for the functionality and use of these public spaces, and we feel it's critical. So I don't think there's any more. There's plenty of record on this. We'd like to add a question to it. It's fine, but I think we've covered everything. My question to council is, what legitimate steps can you take to help us to immediately resolve this or to furlough this until a resolution can be met so that we can meet our business needs going forward for the next few months, as time is of the essence.
Thank you for that, Mr. Correspondence. Well within the 3 minutes. So thank you for that. Are there questions from councillors? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, honestly, I don't have questions because unfortunately, I don't know what we can do. So, you know, just in the absence of other councilors' questions, etc., like, I'm with you, I'm with the community, but we've hit a roadblock that unfortunately, I don't have the skills to suggest next steps, and so I think we need assistance in that regard. I'm not sure how to move forward at this point, but I'd like to.
Again, and I would just remind you, Mr. Correspondence, and I think you know that you're invited to present, but this is not a debate at this time, but go ahead and respond as you choose, recognizing that we won't get it debated right now in this
No,
section of the
it's not a
agenda.
debate, but I wonder if there is a mechanism or a protocol for the business community and those concerned who have already paid their fees for these patios to meet with whomever is responsible for making further decisions, and we can expedite this because, again, it is critical to all of us, and the functionality of these spaces and the usability of them is pertinent to all of us, and it's paramount right now. So I understand that you guys are hamstrung by legalities, but we do not want to stand united alone. We'd like our community and our councillors to be able to formulate a plan with us, and we don't want this to devolve into a melee. But I can tell you right now that many of us are considering defying this order, but we feel it's maybe counterproductive to the entire process, and we need some advice maybe from you. But we are here pleading for your support because you are probably the highest authority that we can go to.
Thank you for that, Mr. Correspondence. Any other questions from councillors? Great. I will thank you for your presentation. If there are other members of the gallery that would wish to speak, please do. Mr. Andrew, welcome.
Your worship and councillors, members of the council, Mr. Howard. Is this on?
Thank you. I start by, I'm representing, my name is George Andrew. I'm representing the Astoria Hotel, and I'm here with this delegation. We have been through as a tourism community, and especially the hotel and restaurant businesses have been very affected by COVID. I think it will take us quite a few years to dig ourselves out of the debt that many of us have incurred. And the council has provided us with an opportunity to expand our restaurant facilities, partially to cover off some of the restrictions from COVID, but we can carry on with expanding our dining facilities onto public spaces, which will help us with our recovery. I think that the protocol for having structures that cover public spaces is well established. They're temporary, movable, and in our particular situation at the Astoria Hotel with Papa George's Restaurant and the Dead Dog Bar, we have approximately 60 seats in the outdoor area. In the situation where both the bar and the restaurant are full and the weather gets inclement, I do not have the capacity to bring in all of the people who are outside. So, and umbrella structures, especially in winds, are not safe. So we have engineered canopies that they're not actually tents. I don't think we can, because tents have walls, but we have engineered canopies which can keep our dining patrons on the public space comfortable. and not require them to bring them in or send them off. So that would be my major concern about.
30 seconds.
Am I over time?
Nope.
Okay. So I would challenge the authority that has decided that these structures are not allowed on the basis of the dining facilities are allowed. We need to keep the customers who are on those facilities comfortable. I would like to know what discussions and the motivation for coming up with those decisions from, I'm assuming, Parks Canada. Would like to know what the agendas were, what who was at those meetings, what was said, and the resolutions that we made.
Thank you. That is time. Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Subject, of course, to questions that councillors may have. Questions from councillors? Councillor Wilson?
I thought you guys were using four-legged umbrellas. You know, honestly, it's really difficult to define, you know, what a tent is, and I think it's going to be very difficult for it to be enforced. And in my personal opinion, if I was you in your situation, I would be using four-legged umbrellas for the upcoming season, because I again agree with you. I feel that it was a targeted suggestion that and an obscure suggestion that tents are not allowed. And we as council, I feel we're positioned to think that we could apply for a discretionary use, and we were told so by Parks Canada, and we took the proper avenues to get there, and were clearly denied. And so the avenue was there. We acted for the business community to get there, to get that discretionary use permit, and then in turn we're shut down. And I'm not in support of that. And if I was in your position, I would be trying to find avenues to discourage the suggestion that you're not using tents, you're using four-legged umbrellas, and go for it. But again, I'm still I don't have an answer.
Thank you. I see no other hands. I will respond to some of your questions or your requests, Mr. Andrew. In particular, you were seeking access to the decision-making process and agendas and so forth. And just to clarify, the municipality of Jasper applied for a discretionary use permit for this particular use of public spaces, recognizing that the land use authority in our community continues to be Parks Canada. We did receive a discretionary use permit, which clearly excluded the use of tents. There was some discussion about that. It was conceivable that council's position that tents ought to be allowed at least for the coming season, and that we strike a task force to look at conditions moving forward would be a solution. We proposed to Parks Canada an amendment to the discretionary use permit, which had been issued, to strike the exclusion of tents. The response that was received last week that was published on our agenda last Friday indicates that our request for an amendment was denied. And so we are now in a position where we've tried, I think, twice to clarify that council is supportive of the use of tents. In fact, of the continuation of patio seating as it appeared last year and the year before, at least for the 2022 season, subject to a task force that we were prepared to strike to consider what conditions should be moving forward. We are now in a position where the municipality has received a discretionary use permit, which will allow us to process applications, but subject to the conditions, and those conditions include a restriction against tents. So that's, I'm sure you're aware of all of that, but just for the record, that explains where we're at. It also, I hope, allows me to explain that we are not in a position to tell you what drove the decision necessarily. We are not at a table with Parks Canada when they make a determination either about our initial application for a discretionary use permit or our request for an amendment. So they make those decisions, they relay the decision to us, and that is the decision that we're confronted with. So next steps are important. Council has yet to have an opportunity as council to figure out what those next steps will be. We will do that starting today, and we appreciate hearing from yourself and others, just to confirm your expectations, or at least your hopes. But I can tell you that council is not in a position, and will not likely ever be in a position, to tell you the thought processes and the word that you used was agendas that determine the decisions that have been communicated to us. We are where we are. And that's primarily a function of the process in which we operate with, I wouldn't say shared jurisdiction, but split jurisdiction in this case. But I think you recognize that, but it's important for the record to clarify. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Andrew? Thank you then for your presentation, Mr. Andrew. The council will come back later in the agenda, potentially to debate this. It appears as agenda item 7.3 on our agenda. So if you want to wait, you're welcome, but we want to hear from community members such as yourself now. So I will thank you again and see whether there is anybody else that wants to present.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Chris Colvin with Jasper Morris Realtors. Forgive me, I'm very nervous. We just wanted to say that yesterday we were finally approved for our retail permit extension. That's quite frustrating because we did ask to only use until 6 p.m. We've also been told that we can use no barriers other than a sandwich board. Thing is, we can't leave our sandwich boards outside overnight, or they're going to be damaged or stolen. So we still have no way of direct or protecting our space. So now we're going to have the issues coming in every morning, and people are going to be in their space. So just wanted to say that, just so you guys know that not using any type of barrier will be difficult for us to secure our space.
Thank you for that. I say that's a bit of an administrative issue, potentially. I'm not sure that it's a policy issue. It might be, but news to me that you're impacted in that way. But congratulations on getting a permit. Tents are not an issue for you, apparently. Something else is, but thank you for letting us know.
Thank you.
Anyone else wish to address council? Young Mr. Mellon.
Yes, Justin Melick, President of the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce. Just wanted to make a note how many businesses are here. We thank council for their continued support in trying to achieve this, and we'll just wait through the debate today, or once council gets a chance to debate how they want to respond to the request, and if there's anything the business community can help moving forward, or the Chamber of Commerce can help moving forward, trying to convince, I guess would be a word, or appeal to Parks Canada as to why tents or coverings are a preferred use, or be at the table with Parks and stating our case. We'd love the opportunity, and any chance we get, we gladly sit at the table. And as you can see, there's lots of people here today, so it's a very important issue to the business community moving into the summer season as we recover from COVID still for the last few years. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mellon. Questions for Mr. Mellon? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I do have a question. In our correspondence received, it did say it was related to feedback that was from the Chamber of Commerce for this decision. Is that
From the Have No Tents.
yes? Or there's a series of things that were where this decision came from, but I wonder what the chambers, where that might have been.
So we canvassed all of the business community to get their opinion. There's a few that did not like tents. The majority is in favor of temporary coverings to make their businesses viable. So at this point, we're speaking for the majority of the members that are hoping to have their area covered for the 2022 season.
Thank you for that. Any other questions for Mr. Mellon? Well, thank you for your attendance, and thank you for your offer to continue to be engaged either as independent businesses or as members of the Chamber of Commerce. And, that may be critical as we move forward. As I indicated earlier, I think we heard from the first speaker. Council did make a motion now several meetings ago, well, at the special meeting, I think, to strike a task force, and that is still potentially a live issue, and we'll come back to that. And so it's important to know that there is community interest in staying engaged in that fashion. So prepare yourself potentially for an invitation. Thank you for your submission. I will give another call, perhaps the final call. There are others here who haven't spoken. If you wish, thanks, sir. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sivas, representing Jasper Proclamation. I wouldn't say much. I would just like to support Soju and Mr. Andrew earlier what they talked about. And probably that's a major issue. Not them going on over again. Just wanted to say that the reason why we are here is to just support that resolution. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Suhos? It appears not. Thank you, sir. We do appreciate your attendance and presenting to us, and we understand the issue and the impact that it has on various businesses in the community. We will, as I said, get to this on our agenda at item 7.3, but given that all of you have businesses to run, I thought it appropriate to advance your opportunity to speak to us early. Council will debate this further, but thank you all, both for your presentations and just generally for your attendance and your engagement in community affairs. That's what allows this council to serve you, is hearing from you. So thank you for that. Councillors, I will move us to agenda item 4, business arising from previous minutes. We approved 3 sets of minutes today, so I will accept any business arising from any of those sets of minutes. If there is nothing else, I have Two questions. With respect to the committee of the whole minute meetings of May 10th, there is a list of people present that could be present in person or virtually. There's not a distinction. I'm not sure that it's important that there is, but for observers, does that indicate simply people attending virtually who are unidentifiable? Mr. Thomas?
Thank you for your question, your worship. Yes, usually it could be either online or in person, but individuals that are not necessarily identified, but are, and not participating in the meeting. So if it was someone who spoke at the meeting, is how their name would be, we would get their names to produce it as part of the record, but yeah, so it means they're only simply in attendance.
The only other question I had arising from the same minutes, we received a report at the last committee of the whole meeting from the Director of Finance and Administration, and there's a note on the top of the second page of the minutes about that. Just absent a name, and I wonder whether it's intentional, or whether we intend a practice to identify people just by position, or whether we might institute, if that is an intentional thing, whether we might identify that we received a report from the Director of Finance and Administration, who has a name, which is, it's a small matter, but I think it shows a degree of respect, and so I wonder. If there is no other, I'm sorry, Councillor Null.
Thank you, Your Worship. Later in the agenda, I'm going to refer to the minutes of the Legislative Committee. And later in our agenda, we will be looking at the policy review priority list. In the future, as we go forward, will the Legislative Committee be suggesting the priority of the review that we'll be having for various bylaws?
Potentially, yes. We discussed at that legislative committee some revisions to the terms of reference, but the terms of reference now direct that we take on the tasks in part assigned by council. So if council wishes the legislative committee to get engaged in setting those priorities, that's fair game, and the committee would take that direction and do it. Whether the committee itself should self-start and determine that they are the ones that set those priorities, I'm not sure. I think, again, the terms of reference, we might allow the committee to do that, but directs the committee to do what it is asked to do or tasked to do by council. So sufficient answer?
Yes, thank you.
Is there any other business arising? All right, if not, then I will turn to agenda item 5, bylaws. 5.1 is simply a bylaw summary for review. And we have agenda item 5.2, tax rate bylaw, which is before us for first and second reading. Mr. Given, do you intend to speak to that or defer to our Director of Finance and Administration? This is Melanchuk.
Your Worship, our Director of Finance and Administration, Melanchuk, who does have a name, is here on Zoom with us, and she will guide council through the 2022 tax rate bylaw. I'll just say that this is an annual course of business, happens every year at this time. And Ms. Malinchak obviously is the subject matter expert on this. So I'll turn it over to Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Your Worship and Council. Today I'm here to go over the tax rate bylaw for 2022. So the recommendation being that Council give first and second reading to the 2022 tax rate bylaw as presented, with alternates as listed below. To give a bit of a background on this, to highlight the tax funded portion of the budget only, so not including the utilities, we're looking at just under 25 million as part of the budget for 2022 that was approved. Of this amount, 9.1 million is to be collected through taxation to cover the business of the municipality. Therefore, as you can see, 63.4% of municipal expenses are covered for the tax supported budget through grants and user fees. In the considerations of council going forward throughout this discussion and looking at the bylaw, there's also a consideration that could be looked at, and that is that the municipal taxes of 9.1 million can further be reduced by an amount of $32,726 to account for an overlevy, which would bring in the 2021 year, which would bring then the taxes to levy in 2022 down to $9,089,577. This is reflected in option 2 as we go further into the document as presented. As you can see in option 2 below in the charts, that if council chooses to go in that direction, then the rates would be slightly lower in option 2 than presented in option 1. And option 1 is the table that is represented within the bylaw at this current point. Another highlight, just to go over quickly, of our $9.1 million, we have to show also that approximately budgeted right now is $696,906 to Parks Canada for land rent and planning, as well as Alberta rural policing in the amount of $252,539. So that equates to just over 10% of the municipal taxation. It's a bit different than how Alberta School Foundation, as listed below, at the nearly 5.4 million, and the designated industrial properties at just over 5,000, and Evergreens Foundation at 860,000, close to 860,000, is presented. Municipal Government Act, you are able to requisition the amount separately from the municipal taxation dollars. At this current moment, we do not separate out Alberta rural policing, and we don't separate out the federal land rent. And it's included as part and parcel of our taxation dollars. However, we like to point out that, it is quite a significant number, considering we're looking at nearly, 1 million of our $9 million goes to those two bodies that we aren't showing as individual requisitioning bodies. In the two tables below, what I've done is I've presented the 2021 mill rates. And then I've broken it down so that you can see the mill rates as per $100,000 assessed and what the value would be if you calculate it out. For urban and rural on the side of residential, Lake Edith properties, non-res, machinery and equipment, as well as the designated industrial assessments. Then option 1, as I stated before, for 2022, is without the overlevy applied that I referenced in the background above, of the 32,000, just over the 32,000. So as we break it down, you can see the amounts under, for instance, if we're looking at residential, the total of Evergreens education municipal under the urban residential would be $564 per every 100,000 of assessed value. Whereas if you look at option 2, if the overlevy is applied to the amount to reduce the taxation level in 2022, that amount just slightly decreases to $563. per every 100,000 of assessed value. And then there's the commercial side, there's rural side. So there's a lot of numbers here, a lot to consider. But also broken down in the further down the page is another table to kind of summarize the difference between what we'd be looking at in 2021 versus option 1 for 2022 or option 2 for 2022, given two scenarios: the residential urban with no commercial whatsoever attached, so no PHAs or whatnot, no private business within your home, and then also looking at commercial urban values assessed at 10 million. So that those comparisons are done, and then you can see the comparison of the difference annually as well as broken out by month or per day. So as indicated before, and Mr. Gibbon had spoken to, this is an annual process that council will see. And within the context of this bylaw that's been rewritten to replace the 2021 tax rate bylaw, the differences that you would see would be the amounts that we are budgeting, requisitioning, the assessed values, as well as the table on the very last page, which again, just to highlight, is the option 1 at this current moment. Thank you for your attention to this. And if you have any questions, I'm available. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Malinchak. Mr. Gibbon, anything else from administration?
Yes, Your Worship, if I could my phone go. The only thing that I'll just provide a little bit more context on, Ms. Malinchak identified that there is an alternative here. And I believe, Ms. Malinchak, you can maybe just reaffirm that the bylaw as drafted reflects the application of that alternative. In the report, it's characterized as okay, don't feel bad if it wasn't me, it was the mic. Ms. Malinchak characterized that as an over levy, and I just want to clarify for council and the public that in fact that is not an over levy because we were unaware of how much we were supposed to collect last year. It is a fact that is a reflection of the fact that during the course of the year, we may have additional properties that are built or redeveloped or upgraded. And we have a supplementary property tax bylaw and a supplementary assessment bylaw that allows us to account for those. When administration does their budget and forecasting at the start of the year, we make an educated representation of how much property there is in the municipality. But of course, through the course of the year and after the municipal budget is set and after the municipal property tax bylaw is set in the spring, somebody may renovate something or somebody may build something that didn't exist before that taxes are applied to. And that means that the municipality may collect more than expected. But it is not a fault of the math in advance. It's actually a recognition of the fact that there is growth and new development in the municipality of Jasper, and administration needs to make some estimations of that, but they are not always 100% precise because we can't forecast exactly what's going to happen. So the over levy is a result of new development and new assessment or increased assessment in the municipality that was unexpected, but was captured in the supplementary property tax assessment. So I just want to clarify for council and the community that that is a result of growth in the community, that we had more revenue than expected last year. And Ms. Malinchak is offering council the opportunity to either to return that revenue, I guess, by lowering the required requisition for this year. Another alternative, as shown in the report, would be essentially to retain that. In that case, that $32,000 and change would be available to municipal operations or, in reserve, the council could dedicate its use at some future time. But just to clarify what the term over levy means, it means that maybe a better representation would be that the assessment overproduced.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon, and thank you, Mrs. Malinchak, wherever you may have gone. I invite questions from councillors. I do have a question for you, Mrs. Melanchuk, on the very item that Mr. Given was just discussing, that is the over levy, in this case, the possibility of an under levy in other cases, and the treatment of that. So from your perspective, Mrs. Melanchuk, what are your legislative requirements with respect to the treatment of the over levy? You have, if it is not applied to reduce the current levy, what else can be done with an overlay?
Your worship, the over levy, it can be decided by council to set aside for another future year. It would be always applied towards the taxation in a year, but it would be which year should council wish to apply it to. There is the opportunity to set it aside and hold on to it for another year. Or two, whichever council should choose.
All right, I appreciate that. So a year or two. So right now it is proposed that it be applied to the 2022 taxation year. You're suggesting it could be applied to 2023. Could it be applied beyond that?
It can be applied, I was suggesting 1 or 2 years, but it can be applied at any year for the taxation, any future year. It can be set aside as a reserve to offset taxes in any future year. It can be applied this year coming up or further down the road. The or two is just to suggest that any other year, to clarify.
All right, so we could, if council determined a wish to do so, put over levies into a reserve account to be used ultimately to reduce a tax burden in subsequent years. Thank you. That was a nod for those who couldn't see.
Yes, exactly.
Other questions from councillors? Councillor Melnick and then Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mrs. Melanchuk. I appreciate the explanation that we received for the over levy, but I want to see how the over levy, if the surplus from last year, is this over and above the surplus from last year, or is this part of that surplus from last year? And I recall we had financial statements that were presented that showed it, and I might have the figure wrong, of some $79,000 of a surplus operationally last year. Thank you for providing clarification on that.
Yes, through your worship, through to Councillor Melnick. Prior to presenting those very basic financial statements at that point, because there's still more to come, because we were just looking at the budget and what revenues and expenses were coming in, there had already been an adjustment to the taxes to move the over levied amount over to another general ledger account that does not represent under the revenue and expenses that you saw. So they were not included. They were already set aside as to be future considerations by council.
And if I may, thank you, Your Worship. So then we're still, we'll hear when the financial statements are finalized, whether that $79,000 surplus, we'll also be able to have an opportunity to determine where that would be placed in the 2022 operating year.
Yes, so during the financial statements, council will be given a request for decision to accept the financial statements as presented. If further conversations would be had about what the surplus would like to, what council would like to do with the surplus, then yes, it's always a consideration that can be had.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Councillor Waxer.
Through you, Your Worship, to Director Malinchuk. I was curious if if this decision comes up every year with an over or under levy, or if this is a unique year.
Councillor Waxer, through you, Your Worship, through Councillor Waxer. Generally in the past, administration has applied the overlay levy in the current year after conversations with the CAO, Mr. Gibbon. He wanted council to make that decision this year.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Kelleher.
There we go. Now, through Your Worship, to Ms. Malinchuk. The 9 million, does that reflect $1 million most money as well? Does the 9 million reflect some most money as well? Did we offset part of the budget with $1 million of most money?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Keller MP, sorry. 1 million was used in the 2021 year, not this 2022 year.
Thank you.
In the absence of other indications, I had one other, not so much a question, but an observation, and I wonder, Mrs. Malinchuk, whether you can confirm not so much my math, but my process. The approximately $9.1 million of tax levy includes, as I understand it, all requisitions. So including Alberta School Foundation, Evergreens. It's not a separate requisition necessarily, but Alberta Rural Policing. All of those are part of that $9.1 million.
Thank you for the question, Your Worship. The $9 million, or just over $9 million, represents the amount of taxation dollars for the municipality to operate. The Alberta School Foundation and Evergreens, as well as the DIP, Designated Industrial, are separate entities that are requisitions that show separate on your tax notice. They are shown as a revenue and expense. So they, in essence, in a budget, wash each other out in a budget. When you see the 25 million, they are represented within that. But the 9 million itself is just the amount to cover municipal operations that is not covered by the user fees or the grants that have been received for the 2022 year. The 9 million does include the amounts for that go to Parks Canada for land use and planning, and it does include the policing amount. They are not separated out on the tax notice.
Thank you for that. Other questions for Mrs. Malinchuk or administration generally with respect to the tax rate? We haven't got specifically to the bylaw yet, but this is the underpinning of the bylaw. Councillor Melnick.
Through Your Worship, to either Mrs. Malinchuk or Mr. Gibbon, the over levy applied And option 2 is the most direct way to get it distributed in the community this year in an equitable basis, as opposed to delaying it for future years. Would that be a fair assessment?
Through your worship, through to Councillor Melnick. Yes, in general terms, it would offset taxation for the upcoming year for the population that pays taxes currently and would have paid taxes in the prior year. So it's the most equitable way to apply the over levy. And as you can see, the other, say, under and over levies were just applied within the context of the bylaw. However, just because it's municipal funds and council can decide to do something and hold on to them for a future year, that's why we're having that conversation this year.
Go ahead, Mr. Kibben.
Sure, Your Worship. I think to supplement Director Malinchuk's perspective there, it is the most equitable and direct way to return that. Does reduce the municipality's flexibility for how you wish to expend funds that have already been collected. So they have been collected. There is an opportunity to use that in a more targeted way for some of the council party, and that's why administration wanted to give council that opportunity to have that discussion at the table. Rather than that opportunity for council to consider whether there's more direct or noticeable use. I think the tables that Ms. Melnick presented demonstrate the difference for a $800,000 residential property is less than $10 a month in applying that. So people's taxes might go, sorry, $10 a year, less than $10 a year. People's taxes will change because of that application. And I think it's a reasonable opportunity for council to consider whether people would prefer that actually $8 a month or $6 a year reduction, or whether that $30,000 would be better served in a reserve. So council could target it to a program, service, or a project that was of greater importance. Again, the administration could absolutely take either direction. We want to ensure that council knew that there was an alternative available to you.
Thank you, Mr. Given. On that very point, perhaps I need more clarity. I thought that I asked the question earlier, but is there a legislative requirement that an over levy ultimately be applied against taxes rather than to a project, for example?
Ms. Malinchuk may have a more detailed perspective, but I would suggest that it's, Your Worship, it's really semantics. Any project the municipality does from money that is cash in a reserve reduces the amount of taxes that you have to collect in the future year. So any opportunity council has to, any use that council would put that to would have the effect of reducing the amount of taxes that we would have to collect in that future year. So, but I don't believe that there's any legislative, I'm not aware of, and Ms. Malinchuk maybe, but I don't believe that there is any legislative requirement for the municipality to direct the use of this money in any way that's specified by legislation.
Thank you for that. The request before us is to give first and second reading to the proposed bylaw. I just had one question about the bylaw itself. There is in the last of the preamble clauses on the first page a recognition that the municipality is required to levy on assessed values taxes sufficient to meet expenditures and requisitions. And then the following clause in the preamble recognizes specifically the requirement to levy on the assessed value of property sufficient to meet the Alberta School Foundation requisition. But the bylaw is absent any mention of the requirement to assess for evergreens. And so I wonder whether there would be any harm adding a preamble to the bylaw, just recognizing that the Evergreens Foundation is a requisition and we are required to levy in respect to that requisition. I assume that it's just absent because it never was included, but I can't see a reason why it wouldn't be included, but I asked the question.
Ms. Melnichuk may have, again, a more precise answer on this. I would suggest, Your Worship, that the municipality is now required to requisition on behalf of Evergreens because we are a party to that organization. I would imagine that if we at any time in the future chose not to be a part of Evergreens and there would be a formal process for that, we'd not be required, we'd no longer be required to levy on their behalf, where all municipalities are required to levy for the School Board Foundation under other provincial law. So we have chosen to be a party to Evergreens, and therefore we are required, where I think these other whereases speak to the fact that we're required by another order of government to levy on their behalf. I'm not sure if Ms. Malchuk, if there's another way to phrase that. I wouldn't suggest that that would be a material change to the bylaw. It may improve sort of public recognition, but I suggest that that whereas probably would be, whereas the Council of the Municipality of Jasper has chosen to be a party to Evergreens and is therefore required. Something along those lines, but again, sort of would change, that would increase the public knowledge, but not materially change the bylaw.
Thank you for that. I can accept that subject to anything that Mrs. Malinchuk might have to say, although I do recall discussions a few decades ago when we were required to join Evergreens. It was not by choice. So now we are required to pay a requisition to an association which we are required to be members of. So to me, it does seem like it's required, but I mean, it winds up the same, and you're absolutely right. My intent simply is to clarify for the public that we are not willy-nilly applying requisitions. In fact, there is a legal obligation on us to add that requisition to the tax levy. Is there a councillor in a position to make a motion that council give the first reading to bylaw number 248? Councillor Roxy? I have a motion from Councillor Waxer that council give first reading to bylaw number 248, being a bylaw of the municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta, to authorize the rates of taxation to be levied against assessable property within the municipality of Jasper for the 2022 taxation year. Is there any debate on that motion? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And is there a councillor prepared to make a motion to give second reading to bylaw number 248? Councillor Wilson, thank you. I have then a motion from Councillor Wilson that council give second reading to bylaw number 248, being a bylaw of the municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta, to authorize the rates of taxation to be levied against assessable property within the municipality of Jasper for the 2022 taxation year. 8. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. That will then go to Parks Canada for certification and should be back before us in 2 weeks. Is that what is anticipated?
Yes, Your Worship, I believe so.
And just in terms of timing, not that we can accelerate it, but that will give us sufficient timing to allow administration to be in a position to get tax notices out within the requisite time.
Your Worship, I see Director Malinchuk nodding that that's correct. I think that that was a part of the imperative of getting it to this regular council meeting today to get that process underway so we can meet all of our other legislative timelines.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Right, agenda item 5.3. Commercial use of public space bylaw is before us for second reading, with some changes having been made after first reading. Through you, Mr. Given, I might assume that you would pass that off to your right.
Your Worship, that's correct. Director Madon is the expert on this file and has developed the changes that are proposed in council packet, so she certainly is the best to speak to it.
Thank you, Mr. Given, Your Worship. The bylaw in front of you today is reflective of the changes that were discussed at the last regular meeting when council gave first reading to this bylaw. And essentially, the only changes are in Schedule A and are highlighted in yellow, and they clarify what our intention was with regards to sidewalk seating and the use of parking lanes. So clarifying that the $100 permit application fee is for either or. And also under 2022 season and 2023 and beyond, recognizing that this is for the use of the parking lane, no matter what usage you are making of it. And the bylaw itself remains the same with the exception of those edits to Schedule A.
Thank you for that. Any questions for Ms. Madon regarding the revisions to the bylaw? Councillor Waxman.
I should have asked this question last week, but I wondered, do those who build a walk around in the parking lane pay both the parking lane fee as well as the $25 per seat fee?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Waxer, I believe the answer is yes.
In the absence of other hands, I picked up on a couple of things that I failed to note last time, and I apologize. But what I noted reviewing for this meeting is that the definition of public space specifically excludes streets. And there are many references throughout the bylaw to streets, but a street is different than public space. And so it occurred to me that in item 5.1.2, there's an obligation on a permit holder for a sidewalk seating or a cafe in a public space to maintain the appearance, but not on a street. Right? I'm absolutely certain that it's just an oversight, but because we have differentiated between street and public space, I would have thought that the reference to in a public space or in a street is responsible would not leave any room for doubt about whether the standards apply in the curb lane or on the sidewalk. I'll leave that with you and give you a moment to do that. I have a similar observation in item 8.1, and again, I should have picked this up on an earlier reading. 8.1 deals with reviews and appeals, and I think there are just some words absent at the end of the first line. So where an application has been refused, a permit revoked or suspended, and then it says a condition or conditions. I think there are words missing, which should probably be suspended for a breach of a condition or conditions. Then certain consequences will befall, but it seems to me there has to be a breach before that happens, and the bylaw ought to recognize. Mr. Gibbon?
Your worship, I think on 8.1, I don't believe there's text missing. I think the intent there is to allow an applicant to appeal conditions that may be attached.
Oh, I see.
So it does continue on a little further in. May require the chief administrative officer to review such refusal, revocation, suspension, attachment. And so I think the attachment that the CAO could review would be those conditions that are attached. And if somebody doesn't like the conditions that were attached to their application, they could appeal those essentially to the CAO, who would review those conditions that were imposed upon them. So I think in that case, I believe the further text addresses that. The item about streets, I think administration would need to take a little bit further look at. Appreciate what you're saying, that it might appear to be inconsistent between sidewalk seating / cafe and general use of commercial public space. We can take that back and have a look.
Thank you for that. And now, based on your comments, I can read that 8.1 differently. So the appeal might be to the conditions attached rather than a breach of the conditions. I was reading it as part of the suspension for a reason, but I now read it differently and I understand. Thank you for that. Finally, the last comments, Schedule A. I just wonder whether in the fee column, there would be benefit in adding to the commercial public space use fee, which is the second line down, $50 to $400 per year. I presume that's an annual fee. But when you're talking about fees, it's different than a permit fee because you apply for a permit once. This is a use fee, but it's an annual fee. And similarly, when it's use of a parking lane, either for the 2022 season or 2023 and beyond. I wonder whether it could be for 2022, $825 per parking stall per year. Similarly, the $1,650 in subsequent years ought to be stated, I think, as per parking stall per year. And finally, I wonder whether it would be beneficial to add per parking stall or portion thereof. If you creep into a stall, do you pay for a portion of the stall, or should we just say, I mean, I don't want to see administration arguing about this, a parking stall or a portion of a parking stall. You can't get a car into the remainder of a stall, so it's effectively gone. Just to avoid fights in the future. I believe that was a suggestion.
With your worship, Director Nadal and her team, as a matter of fact, have already addressed that last issue and have given some thought and consideration to that. And I believe we actually have a measurement that we say is the portion that you can sort of protrude before you have effectively, used another stall. Director Nadal.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbon. I will refrain from sharing too many details, but that is in the application guide for sidewalk seating. And as Mr. Gibbon indicated, there is an allowable amount of space that a patio could encroach into an adjoining parking stall without having to cover the fee. But that amount of space is very minimal, and I believe it's 45 centimeters, which on the basis of the size of cars, the size of stalls, people's driving abilities, what would be reasonable to fit in that stall or not. And to your point, your worship, if half the stall is taken, then that stall is out of commission for paid parking purposes. So there is a real fiscal impact to encroaching into another stall. So that is addressed in our permit structure, if you will. And yes, so if someone encroaches more than 45 centimeters into another stall, then they will be charged for that stall, which would likely result in the patio extending to the full size. But that is the condition we've placed there. And on the question or proposed edit about the annual fee, I think, well, for sidewalk seating or use of parking lane, it is seasonal use that we're proposing. So that is the parameters of the programs, which are a bit outside of the bylaw. And for the commercial public space use fees, the $50 to $400, these could very well be a one-time fee. So if there's an event coming to town, or if there's someone setting up for a day or a weekend, I would hesitate to qualify that as an annual fee. So yeah, those are my observations on the proposed edits.
Thank you very much. Other questions from councillors? Might I have a motion? Councillor Calabranti.
That council gets second reading to bylaw number 248, oh, sorry. That council gets second reading to bylaw number 246, partial use of public space.
Thank you, Councillor Calabranti. Any debate on the motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you. And again, that will get off to Parks Canada for certification and come back to council for third reading in due course, which hopefully will be soon, since the season is upon us. That takes us to agenda item 5.4, emergency management bylaw. And again, Mr. Gibbon, I presume that you will be turning to your right. You could say your right hand assistant.
You're correct, Your Worship. Dr. Nadon, again, is the subject matter expert here, but maybe I'll just preface this to say, council has seen this bylaw recently. The only changes since council saw this was to incorporate the feedback provided the last time the bylaw was here. And so this is amended from committee last week. The amendments are at 3.4 to clarify that the appointments to the EAC shall happen at the organizational meeting or by council resolution shall arise. That would be if there was a vacancy or in the condition that we are where the council organizational meeting won't be for some time. So that's raised by council or committee. So it provides that flexibility and just makes it clear that those appointments could happen at either point. The around 4.5.2, there was some discussion about whether the committee had the ability, or I think the authority, to provide political, financial, and resourcing support to the agency. Obviously, that is council's jurisdiction and ultimate authority to provide those things. And so administration took council advice from committee to revise this to say that the emergency advisory committee's role is to advise council with respect to the political, financial. So essentially, the members of that committee would be the ones who would become have more knowledge about the operations and would receive updates about emergency planning and preparedness, and would be in a position to advise the rest of council about those types of items. And then finally, under 5.2, it's clarified who is actually being appointed, that there are specified positions that are being appointed to form the basis of the agency, being the CAO, the Director of Protection and Legislative Services, and the Fire Chief. And then you'll see that there is also that broader flexibility for any other staff members as required and determined by the Director of Emergency Management. So provides both that specificity of who's the core of the agency and allows that sort of broad latitude for other members to be appointed based on their skills. So, Your Worship, I think the broad content of the bylaw was seen and reviewed by committee last week. The revision is here just for those minor edits based on the feedback. And administration is recommending that council give first and second reading with the revisions as discussed.
Thank you, Mr. Given. Any questions from councillors directed at Mr. Given or administration? Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to Mr. Given. There was a reference made last time this was in front of council regarding review by an external agency. Have we heard positive response back to that review?
Your Worship, through Councillor Melnick, we have followed up. It has been forwarded to the legal team at Alberta Emergency Management Agency, but our field officers have not heard back. So there is another opportunity, shall something arise between second and third reading, we could make an edit. But I can say that we have been working closely with our field officers, and we did use bylaws that we knew were compliant from other communities to build this one. And after a thorough review from administration, we're confident enough to bring it in front of you today, but we have yet to hear back from any formal.
Thank you for that. Any other questions of administration? If not, this is here for first and second reading. So is there a councillor prepared to make a motion for first reading? Councillor Mellon?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would make that motion that council give first reading to bylaw 247, the emergency management bylaw.
Thank you, Councillor Melnick. Is there any debate? Seeing nothing, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And is there a motion then for second reading? Councillor Wilson, thank you. I have a motion from Councillor Wilson that council read for a second time bylaw number 247, being bylaw of the specialized municipality of Jasper in the province of Alberta, to provide for the direction and control of the municipality's emergency responses. Seeing no indication of debate, I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you all for that. We are now at 2:53. I know that Mr. Given has an appointment at 3 p.m. Alberta Municipalities is hosting an online virtual session with respect to the local government fiscal framework. It's a very important topic. I too was registered, but I won't be able to attend. But I think what I will do is call a brief recess now. Mr. Given can make a dignified exit, leaving who he will in charge of administration's duties for the rest of the meeting, and we can reconvene at 3 o'clock after a short recess. Thank you all. We are reconvened and back in session, and we are at agenda item 6, request for decision, beginning with agenda item 6.1. I will turn to Ms. Madon now.
Thank you, Your Worship. The report before you today has a recommendation that suggests that council approve the policy review priority list as presented. This matter is arising because we have been working on our policies, and recognition to Ms. Acorn and picking up that this item was committee recommended council approve the policy review priority list as presented, but we never did go back to council. So that is why this is in front of you today. And essentially, we are just trying to make sure that we advance the process, and that that list that was identified back in July is formalized. Having that said, we have been working on a lot of those policies already, and it doesn't prevent council or the legislative committee from continuing to work on that list and refining it and setting different priorities. But in a nutshell, we are just trying to close the loop and ensure that that direction is provided formally by council. And that is why this is before you today.
Thank you for that. Discussion by council. I then just have a question about the ordering. I was surprised to see of the 9 that there are slightly more of that 9 that appear to me to be public-facing policies as opposed to internal. Although I thought for the most part, and maybe if we looked at all of our policies, it would be a preponderance of them are internal policies. They guide how we operate rather than how we interface with the public, because typically that's more likely to be through a bylaw. That said, I think policies that are public facing should perhaps be advanced over internal policies. And so I divided them up in that fashion. And I had citizen engagement as a policy or review as number 1, as to you. But then I went right to the bottom of the list, service standards, because that has a direct impact on service levels that our residents receive. Encroachments, believe it or not, from my other hat, are a fairly public-facing issue. People dealing with encroachments, it becomes a concern. I would advance that. Electronic meetings and participation, again, it's a form of engagement. So I might have advanced that. And joint use of municipal facilities, again, that's an opportunity for the public to make use of facilities, so more of a public-facing policy than internal. And then balance, I thought, were more internal. So our budget process, debts and reserve limits, project approvals, and staff recruitment, all sort of more internal, which is more, I think, common to our policies. So my view was that perhaps the public-facing ones should be given priority and the internal ones deferred, because our first obligation ought to be to the public we serve, potentially, at least arguably. So I broke them up in that fashion, and I wondered whether there was a different process in coming up with this list and how it might have been achieved, particularly in terms of need to address public issues rather than internal issues.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate the nuance you bring to the public-facing policies versus the more internal-facing. And my observation here would be that the policies regulate how staff handle a specific process, which process may be more public-facing in certain circumstances than others, but still not regulating the behavior or the conduct of the public, which then will be through a bylaw. But that is a good observation. My comment on this one would be that previously council had developed that list and had advanced the fiscal and financial controls policy. There was a separate motion at committee of the whole that directed administration to address that one specifically first, which we have completed. And I think that is what led to the rest of that motion being lost in the program and not making its way back to regular meeting until we started looking at it again and realized we were missing a piece of the process. Having that said, so that is a priority list that would have been established by the previous council in July. There is now the legislative committee, which might provide some assistance in determining which policies might have a higher priority, but I would also suggest that administration following this, we have since identified a few others that could be rescinded, which would be easy ones to help us navigate our policy review process. And therefore, there's a few different avenues that council could select to determine which priorities and direct administration more precisely on which ones to advance. Otherwise, I think this list as it's presented was not necessarily reflective of an order of priority, but just a general list of policies that need to be looked at. So we're definitely open to taking direction from council in whatever shape it comes. But I guess the request today is more so about confirming that those policies are still on the list and still priorities for this current council. But having that said, could be influenced by other factors such as recommendations from the legislative committee.
Thank you for that, and I get that nuance. So it's not so much about ordering the priorities as confirming that these are the priorities, because that seemed to have been a bit derailed after we dealt with the one policy. Thank you for that. Okay. Other comments with respect to the request, which is a request to approve that priority list, but that doesn't necessarily imply that that is the order of the priority. It's just that all of those are on the priority list. Correct?
Yes, and if I may, Your Worship, I would suggest that a committee of the whole conversation for council to have the opportunity to provide us with an order or new policies that could be added, but this is just to close the loop on the previous efforts.
Thank you for that. And again, I think that if council was interested in asking the legislative committee to order the priorities once council has established them, that might be in order as well. Councilors? Councilor Wilson?
I would make the motion that council approve the policy review priority list as presented.
Thank you for that. Any debate? I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed? That is carried. Do we need, does administration feel they need direction where to from here? Having approved that priority list?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the fact that we caught that there was a piece of the process missing in this report is reflective of where our department is heading and the fact that our staff is now a bit more settled in and has time to look at these items. So if you leave it in our hands, we will return to a committee of the whole with recommendations from administration, but certainly if council at this stage would like to engage the legislative committee or direct us more precisely on when to return, that could be additional direction you could provide us today, but otherwise it is left in our hands, which is a good alternative, but does not provide timelines or certainty on your end, I would suggest.
I would recommend if there's a councillor so interested, a separate motion on having approved the priority list, a direction to have administration return at some future date to committee of the whole with a recommendation for next steps. That allows the matter then to be put on the motion action list, and we won't be back in this situation again. It'll be in front of us. So, Councillor Flaxer? So without trying to repeat that motion, it's recorded. Perfect. I have the motion. Any debate? I'll call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That's carried. So that direction, when administration is ready to return to committee of the whole. Thank you for that. Takes us to a request for a proclamation for National Public Works Week. We have a request for a proclamation. Many councillors attended last Friday, so there's recognition unofficially of National Public Works Week and ended with our own operations staff. Some of us got to drive large equipment that we will never operate again, probably. But it was both revealing and informative and quite exciting. So thank you to Mr. Greathead for providing us that opportunity. Is there a councillor prepared to make a motion? Councillor Waxer?
That council proclaim May 15th to May 21st, 2022, National Public Works Week in the municipality of Jasper.
Soon there will be no debate. I will call the question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. And I do therefore so proclaim. The week of May 15th to 21st, 2022 as National Public Works Week in the municipality of Jasper. Agenda item 7, correspondence for information, consideration, or action. We begin with 7.1, a letter we have received from PetroCanada with a request. So certainly for consideration and potentially for action. Any comment from councillors with respect to the letter? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Your Worship. When we have situations like this that require additional information from other departments, is it appropriate that this be referred to the Public Works for, I guess, information to come back to us as to the feasibility of this request? And further to that, is there a process where we're able to forward other things that come to the council's attention to administration to pull together maybe a capital program for 2023, considering other things that we hear?
I think it is certainly within our purview to direct administration. I would suggest perhaps not identify the department, but direct administration through the CAO to come back with a report. I think that's logical, probably necessary in the circumstances. The one question I would have for Ms. McDonald sitting and for Mr. Given today is just capacity issues. Operations obviously is busy all the time, particularly it seems so in the spring gearing up for the busy summer season. So the extent to which they could provide us with the necessary information is somewhat doubtful, but I think it would be appropriate to make a motion to direct administration to return with a report on feasibility. You're not, I'm going to presume, in a position to make a comment about capacity levels right now for Mr. Greathead's department, because that's where it will land, I'm sure.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am not, but I would agree that so council could receive this for information, and that's the end of the motion, or council could receive for information and direct administration to return to a future committee of the whole and with a report on the matter, and this would then get added to the motion action list, which would then get assigned and put a timeline to. So that is the purpose of the motion action list. We, as the senior leadership team, look at the requests and put a date on it that we think is reasonable, and then council has an idea when the item might return.
Thank you for that. Councillor Melnick, I might assume that you would be prepared to make such a motion.
I would be prepared to make that motion.
Is that motion clear enough that council receive the letter as information and that council direct administration to return to a future committee of the whole meeting with recommendations with respect to potential next steps. Any debate on that motion? All those in favor? And none opposed? That is carried. In order that letter writers not be left hanging, I wonder whether I might ask staff to just prepare a response, which I'm happy to add my name and signature just to confirm to the letter writer that we have referred the matter for a report from administration, and council will consider it at a later date, just so that a resident business is not left wondering what we've done. That takes us to agenda item 7.2, a letter that we have received from Parks Canada as a stakeholder with respect to private home accommodation draft policy. For us, again, for information, consideration, or action. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. It's quite a large, actually large document. I think it covers a lot of stuff, but Parks Canada has taken quite a while to develop this, and thank them for that. Although we're requested, and as well as any feedback requested to be in within less than a month, June 13th, 2022. I think that's a tight timeline. I'm proposing that we direct administration to request an extension to the deadline until December 15th, 2022. So we can really unpack what we've received and provide substantial and get substantial feedback to the development office on this. It's a relatively hot topic.
Thank you for that. Councillor Wilson, any other suggestions or comments? Councillor Calaharan.
I really like Councillor Wilson's suggestion. I think it's a very hot topic. I've heard lots in town this week on this topic. I think this is something that is very important to our residents and some of our businesses. And I think, this is where we really do have to have community engagement. And maybe we have to have a town hall with our residents and community and have their feedback before we give our feedback to our staff.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I also agree with Councillor Wilson. It also gives our residents with PHAs the chance to have a summer and maybe imagine a few of these scenarios or bring back some actual proper feedback. But I agree with that motion.
Just confirming, was there a motion?
Yeah, there was a motion. Sorry, my mic is still on. But I guess I spoke to the motion a little bit as well, but the motion would be to direct administration to request from Parks Canada an extension to the deadline for feedback from June 13th to an extended date of December 15th, 2020.
Thank you for that. There has already been debate on the motion. Is there any further debate? I will call the question and all those in favor. There are none opposed. That is carried. So I take it to Mr. Given. The email was addressed to Mr. Given, so he can presumably respond in compliance with the council's direction to request an extension. Thank you. The next agenda item, sorry.
Would we need further direction for administration or ourselves to plan a future meeting to discuss this document.
I would suggest potentially we direct now that the matter come back before committee of the whole next week. If the request for an extension of time is denied, then we have a very short time to get responses in. So I don't think we should defer for too long. We can keep it alive by having it back on our agenda next week, I would think. See whether there's any response. So
We need a motion for that.
I'm not sure what we do. We can just, I would confirm in an email perhaps to staff to just add it to next week's agenda for the committee of the whole. And then we have agenda item 7.3, correspondence that we received from Parks Canada. I say we, wasn't we at all. This is the issue that brought the delegations to us earlier today. And so again, it's before us for information, consideration, or action. This is the denial of the request to amend the discretionary use permit to allow for the use of tents for the 2022 season. Again, turn to council with suggestions of next steps for council at this stage, bearing in mind the comments that we received from, is it 5 presenters today? Councillor Keller.
I believe Parks Canada has made up their mind locally that this is not going to be allowed. I think that if we work with our delegation here today with the Chamber of Commerce, maybe we need to write a joint letter to the Minister of the Environment who oversees Parks Canada, saying that, you know, our business community is very unhappy with this decision. We would like to work with Parks on a working committee that they obviously do not want to do, and ask for them also involve our MP.
Thank you for that. Councillor Keller, thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Do we have an ability to appeal the rule? Is there, you know, with the development officer, is that set out in the regulations, like is there an option to appeal?
Your worship, through Councillor Wilson, I hesitate to have a firm position on this one. I would have to make sure we go back and clarify that information, but my understanding is that usually discretionary use amendments or would go to the Planning Development Advisory Committee. But that, whether it goes there or not, is an administrative decision at Parks Canada, as in if your request is clearly outside the scope, then they may deny an appearance before PDAC. And we did use an approach where we wrote letters to the development office and to the superintendent. We did not formally fill out a form and follow that process. I don't know that the outcome would have been any different, but certainly investigating whether there are other avenues for appeal with Parks Canada is something Mr. Given and myself could confirm. I don't believe there are at this stage, but we could certainly do our homework and get back to council on this item.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I'm reading through the letter and they reached the conclusion with 4 points. One was business committee feedback received from the chamber, and we heard this morning from Chamber President Justin Melnick that's not actually what was said, I looked through recommendations from PDAC. I don't know if that's happened. And then I look at guidelines and reports in the town of Banff. And speaking with some residents in Banff and a councillor in Banff, the tents in question weren't the pop-ups that have been used in Jasper, the big event tents, and even Google searching event tent. They're all those big, huge tents with walls, and I'm disappointed in this, and I don't really know where else to go. But if there is an appeal process, maybe these 4 points aren't actually right. Does that make sense to you guys? I don't know. Yeah. As a new counselor, I'm clearly learning our relationship with Parks Canada, and I don't know what else can we do? Like, what can we do? I don't even know who I'm asking that to.
Thank you. Other comments? Councillor Milner.
Thank you, Your Worship. When we last had delegations here, we did indicate that we would be open to establishing a working committee for us to be able to start now with how we can move forward on more permanent guidelines. Recognizing that this may be something that committee might be able to look at, but I wonder if it'd be appropriate to have a motion to direct administration to provide a terms of reference for a working committee for the sidewalk seating or public use of public space.
Sorry, I'm just catching up with Ken. Thank you. I will accept firstly that as a motion. I'll come back. There are two others I think out there. An earlier council motion was that we investigate the creation of a task force. So just to be consistent, I would use that wording. I think the motion then might be, as you have made it, that council direct administration to draft terms of reference for a task force to review the conditions which might attach to a discretionary use permit for sidewalk seating or cafe outdoor seating, and to return to council with that report or with those draft terms of reference. And if that is your motion.
That pretty well is my motion with some very critical words added in. The only other thing might be for the motion to have a timeline for getting back to committee of the whole. And I would suggest that we would have this back to us maybe at the first committee of the whole meeting in June. If possible.
Yeah, I would say sooner if possible. Okay. Yeah. Perhaps the wording as soon as possible. I certainly speak in favor of the motion, and if the administration requires, I can reread it for the record. But we did canvass earlier and support it as a group. The benefit that we saw at a community level of establishing a task force and inviting necessary people, if the administration can draft terms of reference, we could review those and then presumably invite other stakeholders so that we can discuss these really important conditions that apply. So the major hurdle has been surmounted. That is, we have received upon request, a discretionary use permit. Simply some or one of the conditions that present ongoing problems. So the work of the task force could be confined to reviewing conditions. It doesn't have to start over seeking discretionary use permit. And it's consistent with the approach that we've already taken, and we heard even again today that those members, at least of the public, who attended, wanted to speak on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, are interested in being part of that. So I fully endorse that. That's a critical first step for us. I will call a question unless there is further debate on that. Councillor Wilson?
I'm sorry, I missed it, but I think one of the crucial members of that or attendees of that task force would be Parks Canada. I think they need to be at the table. We need some accountability. And if the decision is coming from that office, there needs to be members from that office on that task force accountable to the community. Because our community was here today and we want to be accountable to them, but we don't have that ability to do so on a topic like this, and it's really frustrating.
Thank you for that. Right now, I will say that who would be part of the task force is not defined in the motion. The motion is for administration to draft terms of reference. I would propose that administration understands those nuances and can come back to us with draft terms of reference. And if we think that the party is missing, we can comment at that time, but I'd prefer not to ask administration to perform a task and tell them how to do it at the same time. If we're going to do that, we should just do it. So I am comfortable personally with just directing administration to return with draft terms of reference as soon as possible. Other debates? Right, I will call the question then on the motion to have council direct administration to draft terms of reference for the task force to review conditions which may attach to a discretionary use permit for commercial use of public space and sidewalk seating, cafe seating in particular, and to return to council as soon as possible. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. There were two other items so far that had been proposed that I would like to see. We have a motion. We had one question on appeals. I think that was Councillor Wilson. And so are you interested in a motion to direct administration to investigate the possibility of an appeal to the Planning and Development Advisory Committee or elsewhere from the denial of the amendment to the discretionary use permit?
Yes, and I think the appeal, in my mind, shouldn't be at the local level. I think that we should be appealing. Her name escapes me.
Kent.
Michaela Kent. If that's the proper avenue to go, but I think we should my motion, I guess, would be to investigate what appeal process we have open to us.
Well stated. Thank you. Any debate on that? I would speak in favor of that motion. I think that's good, and I like the generality of it. Just investigate whatever avenue of appeal we might have. Appreciate that. There is nothing else. I will call a question. All those in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. And then this is almost in reverse order, but we started with you, Councillor Calahanty, and that your the basis of a motion you might make would be to have council, rather than directing administration to do it, have council write to the minister for a review of the denial of the requested amendment to the discretionary use permit.
I make that motion, but I would leave it that we investigate first where we can, as Councillor Wilson suggested, that if there's a review that we can move to the office in Calgary. And, you know, if it comes back as locally, it's, you know, a lot of decisions that are made by PDAC and locally come back to, if that's what justice with the intended size, then that's the way it goes. So I think if, you know, the working committee get together and they feel like there's an option, then I think council, that we can motion council right on behalf, once we get input from Chamber of Commerce and the other members of the community.
I'm sorry, I missed.
Okay,
So that
so I
we
had
write
said-
on behalf, sorry.
Well, I had said earlier today that like we'd write a letter, but we should involve the Chamber of Commerce and the local businesses, you know, if they wanted us to take that approach. And Jim knows their MP, so I would think that if we get a working group together, that we could use that as an option.
Okay, I just, for myself, trying to sort out whether if we pass a motion to write a letter to the minister, we would defer until we have more discussions with local stakeholders. Right, I will accept that as a motion. I look over toward Acorn. Is there a motion with sufficient clarity for you to record it, or would you like me to try and restate it? You will. I was afraid of it. The motion is that council write to the minister responsible for Parks Canada for a review of the denial for the requested amendment to the discretionary use permits after consultation with local stakeholders. Understood? All right, I will call that question. All those in favor? Are not opposed? That's carried. I open it still to councillors. Are there any other suggested avenues? We are not alone in communities that have sidewalk seating and curbside seating for restaurants, but perhaps it is sufficient to leave that sort of investigation to the task force that we hope to get going. I think there is a wealth of information that might be available to compare and contrast our situation, but rather than have a separate motion, I would be content if we do confirm in terms of reference for the task force that that task force might do that detailed investigation. So I don't think it needs to be a standalone, but it's certainly something that I think is going to be important as we move forward. Is there anything else that council can consider? All right, thank you. I have one question for administration. I think it is self-evident, but I think it's important in this public venue to confirm. We issue business licenses or permits in this case, I guess, for applicants for either sidewalk seating or commercial use of public space in a curbside lane. So I take it then that applicants will be issued a permit subject to the conditions which have been outlined in the correspondence that we have received from PetroCanada. Is that fair?
I'm sorry, Your Worship, can you repeat the question?
The municipality will receive applications from interested businesses with respect to commercial use of public space, whether it's sidewalk or curbside. And I take it that those permits now, as things stand, will be issued subject to the conditions which have been articulated in the discretionary use permit, which the municipality has received from PetroCanada.
Yes, that is accurate, and we in fact have been issuing permits for about 2 weeks now. But within the parameters outlined in the letter, and we have communicated quite effectively with applicants that any permit application with tents would get denied. And that's what we have done. So permits have been issued, and we would have issued amendments to permit had this amendment on the GU permit been approved.
Thank you for that. I just think from a public perspective, it's important for people to know expectations. So thank you for that. Is there anything else required? Anybody interested in responding, for example, to the letter? Councillor Calderon?
Would we not send back a letter saying that we're putting the task force together and that they're invited to be part of the task force?
Until they are, they aren't. That would just be my argument. You can make the motion. I would be sensitive since we don't have the terms of reference. Councillor Miller?
Thank you. That's where I was going to go as well. We should have the terms of reference so we know who we're asking or what is being recommended.
Councillor Wilson?
I think we can respond suggesting that we would like to we'd like them to let us know our appeal options. It's all pretty candid. I'm sure there's something there should be an avenue for an applicant to follow up if you don't feel like you've been treated fairly. So I think maybe just a short letter responding that, yeah, we've received your denial, but we'd like to know our options for appeal.
Again, valid, but is that not covered by the first motion? Would that be your first order in the first motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was going to suggest that can be covered off by the initial motion, but having the clarity certainly helps, and we can ensure we get that done on the basis of the motion that was already passed.
Satisfied?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, well, I appreciate that answer, Councillor Roxon.
Were you directed to you, Your Worship, were you recommending that council write a letter or were you referencing administration? Because I believe the appeal letter was going to be for administration.
Yes, and I wasn't recommending, it's a piece of correspondence. It's not directed to council, it's directed to administration. But it's a piece of correspondence that is on our agenda. So it just seemed to me to open the question how we might respond, but I think that we have a clear answer now. And it'll be responded to in terms of what avenues appeal to us. I think that's fair. All right, well, thank you all for that discussion. I again thank the members of the public who attended today and spoke as delegates, not as one delegation. So far as I can recall, there was not a specific request to council other than to engage on behalf of residents and resident businesses to show some form of unity or solidarity. So I don't think anybody suggested a particular action that we might take other than what we have already determined to take. I just want to make sure that we haven't left anything unanswered or undone. Nobody can recall any specific requests. All right, thank you. That takes us then to agenda item 8, other new business. If I might, I hope to use this opportunity to make a motion. So, Councillor Laxer, if you would take the chair, I will make a motion, and that motion is this, and it's not necessarily other new business, but it's a new twist on old business, but I think it fits here. There has been widespread commentary regarding utility rates, and council has looked closely at that. We've had meetings most recently with representatives of the Chamber of Commerce with respect to it. What I would like council to do is to direct administration to develop a set of frequently asked questions with responses in an informative package, and have that presented on our website to help resolve some of the questions that are out there. It is increasingly difficult to answer every resident, but there is a need for consistency and clarity in our communications. And I think that's a direction from council to have administration put that into a question and answer, pardon me, a frequently asked questions format and get it on the website. I think it would simply make use of work that administration has already done and help us communicate a message. So my motion would be to direct administration to just do that. Again, and the administration has the time to do that, but recognizing much of the work has already been done. But I think that level of communication would certainly be of assistance to all of our residents to understand what's going on with utility rates.
Is there any debate on that? Can I call the question? All in favor? Motion passed. I'll pass the chair back to you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The next agenda item is motion action list, but it was reviewed and adjusted last week, so it's just here for information, which takes us to agenda item 10, councillor reports, councillor appointments to various boards and committees. Are there any reports? Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am happy to report that Tuesday is meeting day in my life, and we'll be attending a meeting this evening of the Jasper Yellowhead Historical Society, the monthly meeting. As well, Wednesday is the Community Conversations Recreation Committee meeting at 3:30 in person at the boardroom in the activity center. So these conversations are going back into the community, and hopefully we have people able to attend personally. And then I think I'll be joining Councillor Wilson, who I will leave him to describe what's happening Thursday.
Well, yes, we'll be attending Jasper Community Housing Corporation meeting Thursday at 2:30. We're having an update from Colliers with regards to next steps, governance of our corporation, and where we can move in the near future.
Thank you for that. Councillor Watson.
I attended the early childhood community conversation on behalf of Councillor Kelleher, and at that conversation there was an enthusiastic and collaborative plan to work toward a children's festival for the preschool children one day in August. And there was great enthusiasm from a variety of agencies ready to and prepared to be involved.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I attended a library board meeting last Wednesday, and like everyone in our town are looking for staff and are slightly short staffed for the summer, but optimistic. I know this isn't a committee, but I did attend the barbecue on Friday at the Ops building, and it was fantastic. And I think the community should be very proud of our Director of Operations. Also, it was very fun driving the skipper.
I also attended the barbecue last Friday. It was a lot of fun, and I'm off to Evergreen, Stratman tomorrow and Thursday at the open.
Thank you, Councillor Kelleher. I can report that Monday a week ago, Mr. Gibbon and I had lunch with representatives of the Edmonton International Airport and Mr. Jackson from Tourism Jasper, and just discussed items of interest and concern to all parties. So they bring in a number of visitors, and we've talked about how synergies might be developed in that respect. It's a good opportunity. On the 10th, as council will know, but nobody reported, we had our own internal workshop on utilities and utility rates, which was important. On Thursday of last week, Councillor Melnick and Mr. Gibbon and I met with the Chamber Executive, as I indicated, and some others, not all necessarily Chamber Executive, but to discuss utility rates and principles which underlie the new CCC law. Wednesday of last week, again, all councillors who are here attended the meeting with Parks Canada at the Jasper Inn Suites, where we also had the attendance of Vice President of Operations for Parks Canada, Mr. Andrew Campbell, and I mentioned Wednesday evening at the State of the Municipality address at Cassio's Restaurant, but those were particularly productive meetings, and we have agreed to co-review the agreement for the establishment of local government in the town of Jasper. So that will unfold over some time. Thursday of last week, I was able to attend briefly at Snakesville for the reforestation program instituted by Mr. Frechette, and not only was that a lot of fun and really exciting to see those trees from the ground, I happened to get to excavate a site that turned into be an archaeological dig of some sort. So it was quite interesting. And finally, the Public Works barbecue last week. Yes, I send out my kudos to staff for that. It's really good for council to see our staff and the equipment that they operate and what they do. Very, very happy to have been there. And I think that is it for me. Councillor Melvin.
Thank you, Your Worship. I did forget something, which is warranted in mentioning to congratulate the community. The Saturday Community Spark Cleanup Day, I had the opportunity to be invited to the Southview Co-op to see what work was being done there. And along those lines, I took the opportunity to also go to Stone Mountain, Patricia Circle, and visited Councillor Waxer in Cabin Creek, and the community and the work that was done was really encouraging to see as we go into the fire season, and the excitement and the commitment in some of the areas that and the neighborhoods that I mentioned. And I think that bodes well for the future of the community for being prepared.
Thank you for that, Councillor Melnick. I too forgot to mention that. I was one of those really fortunate people in the neighborhood where our local fire smart representative is none other than Mr. Van Tegum, and our community champion is none other than Mr. Blanc. So we had a stellar effort down on Tonquin and Turret, but I too went by Southview, for example, and they were doing wonderful work, and all around town. Aspen Gardens had a huge pile. I spoke with Mr. Greathead about 4 or 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, and they had not even got to the east end of town yet, and they had 3 tons, just about all from west of Pine. So the amount of material that was collected is phenomenal. So thank you for bringing that up. A very strong community engagement in that. And thanks to staff for making that well known and providing those opportunities for our community to safeguard itself. All right, if there are no other reports, thank you all. Agenda item 11. There is a NETNA tomorrow evening, it appears. At the Legion. On June 15th, somewhere else. And the Jasper Park Chamber of Commerce Annual General Meeting on June 21st. And Canada Day is approaching. I'm not there, but nobody will forget. Is there anything else coming up of which any particular council is aware that it's not on the list? Sure.
Lemonade Day in June.
Do you remember what day?
The Jasper Fondo.
June 18th, Lemonade Day.
Thank you. All right, if there is nothing else, thank you for that. That takes us then to agenda item 12. Councillor Hall, thank you. A motion to adjourn. All those in favor? There are none opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you all. Thank you to any members of the community who had tuned in for the day on the Zoom platform. Appreciate that. And we will be back in session 9:30 a.m. next Tuesday morning, sitting as committee of the whole. So, thank you all.